What's up, everybody? I'm going to be looking through a series that I had done previously called Religious Cults in America. I got a couple videos on Mormonism. Tonight I'm going to start on the Jehovah Witnesses series. I'm going to break this down into 3 parts. We're going to look at the history of Jehovah Witnesses first today, and then we're going to talk about their Bible translation, New World Translation, and their aspect of disfellowship, along with some influences they had in establishing this religion. And then the third thing we're going to talk about, the third video, is the prophecies that they had. Of course, they predicted that Jesus would come back numerous times and then finally settled for an visible return in 1914, but also some doctrinal errors. One of the things I like to do with Jehovah Witnesses when they're here is they're different from Mormons, where the Mormons, they'll use a King James Bible, but they'll only believe in it as far as it's accurately translated by them or Joseph Smith. If we try to use a King James Bible for Jehovah Witnesses to witness to them, they'll reject it because they have their own translation. But even in their own translation, you can show them inconsistencies and the deity of Christ, because their New World Translation is a man-made Bible, man-made book, a man-made record, if you will, and so it is fallible, as opposed to the King James Holy Scriptures. It is infallible. There are no contradictions. There's no way to refute it. Prophecy has been fulfilled time and time again and will be fulfilled in the future for the end times and everything else going on. And so that's going to be covered in a future video. But today is just more of a boring video, but understanding the history, the establishment of what's called the Jehovah's Witness. Basically, it was that guy down there at the bottom right. His name's Charles Taz Russell, and he's the founder of this organization from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Basically, him and a group of what they would consider Bible students analyzed what the Bible taught and compared that with what other churches were teaching that day. And it led Charles Taz Russell to go ahead and stray away from what the Orthodox teaching was and establish their own belief sets. They began producing, like it says there, their newspapers, their books, and what's commonly known worldwide as the Watchtower Journal or the Watchtower Magazine. Basically, his original goal with the establishment of this was supposedly to promote the teachings of Jesus and follow the first century church, the New Testament church in the book of Acts. But what do they teach organizationally? Well, if you look at a hierarchy chart, if you will, you'll see that they say they get all their information from Jehovah God. Okay, now I wouldn't argue that. The Bible is clearly revealed, written record from God to man, and so I wouldn't disagree with that. But the question is, who is this God, and what does this God say? Basically, they got Jehovah God, God the Father, and then they have Jesus Christ, who is more or less, we'll talk about that, he is a created being in their eyes. Then underneath Jesus Christ, they have what they call the faithful and discreet slave. Basically, this is their governing body, and their governing body goes ahead and gives information out, directs what their organization believes, and gives the information to the local congregations, as well as the congregational servants, ministerial servants, who go ahead and more or less facilitate that information in the local bodies. Basically, the faithful and discreet slave is this. Right now, it's headquartered in Brooklyn, New York. It's the Watchtower building. And basically, this was from 1884 to 1976. Charles Taz Russell was the original founder. And basically, for a long period of time, you could see almost 100 years, there was one sole individual that was in charge of the entire organization. And so what that one sole individual believed, that's what they taught. And it was an interpretation of one man. And so you see, from 1884 to 1916, it was Charles Taz Russell. Upon his death, the man by the name of Joseph Rutherford took the reins. And there's a lot of controversy over Rutherford as well. But he was arrested, then he was freed. And you could look into that separately if you'd like. I'm not going to go into details. But he was their leader until 42, in which Nathan Knorr was their sole leader until it was reorganized to become what we know of today as the governing body, or the faithful and discreet slave, as what they call it. And basically, each of those individuals and this governing body now give direction through the entire organization as far as what they teach, how they outreach, how they take care of financial allotments. If you were to look more in depth as far as their committees and their helpers, you'll see these offices, if you will, that they have in their organization. And so, again, this is going to be sort of a dry video, but I think it's important to understand the inception of this cult. Basically, members must obey the faithful and discreet slave. This is according to one of their publications. Over there on the right, you can see, if we minimize the Bible-based counsel that we receive through the faithful and discreet slave class, i.e. the Watchtower headquarters in Brooklyn, choosing to follow an independent course, we would be placing ourselves at odds with God's unfolding purpose. This could endanger our peaceful relationship with Jehovah. So if we minimize the Bible-based counsel that this group of people tells me what to believe and how to live, then we would make ourselves at odds with God. Then it says that here in an old publication from the Watchtower that the Bible is an organizational book and belongs to the congregation as an organization, not to individuals like you or like me. Regardless of how sincerely you or me think we can interpret the Bible. For this reason, the Bible cannot be properly understood without Jehovah's visible organization in mind. It's like the comic strip that I found down there. They teach that you can't understand their teachings without them telling you what it means. Different from if I were to take my King James Bible here, and I were to pray, and I would go ahead and study and just look at the context. You look at the immediate passage, find out what's happening. You look at the surrounding context, the greater context, and you look at the book. What's the book about and everything like that. You can understand what that actual passage means and how to apply it to your life. Acts 17:11. Paul was very impressed by those at Berea because they studied what Paul had said. They didn't go to an organization and say, hey, is what Paul said accurate? Are we to believe it? No, they studied for themselves, and they studied in the Torah. They studied in the law to see what Paul had said and see if those things were so. And they came to the conclusion that yes, they were accurately interpreting Scripture. Paul was accurate in his message, and they became believers. And that's where the terms be a Berean comes from the city of Berea, where they were studying Scripture and seeing whether those things were so. And so the Bible clearly shows that we're to be students of Scripture. We are to be diligent in our studies to go ahead and apply it to our lives. But they teach that you can't and I can't understand their teachings unless we listen to what the faithful and discreet slave tells us it means. So again, man-made religion. Then they have these things called Bethel complexes. I think there's 3 main headquarters. This one's in Wallkill, I think is in New York. Bethel meaning El God, Beth house, house of God complexes. And basically this particular location is where they get all their Jehovah's Witness volunteers to produce all of their literature. Now the main thing with Jehovah's Witnesses is that they produce all this literature, they try to sell it door to door, and that's how they make a lot of their money. It's a financially motivated cult or religion. You can read there that complexes or compounds, as I'd like to call it, they're distanced from the world. They're in their own facility. If you can see there, they have their own city. It's a self-sustaining area that they're separated from the world to go ahead and produce the material that the organization wants, more or less free of charge, because they don't have to pay these people. They are more or less like slaves to the organization. But then from the Bethel complexes, you have your kingdom halls, and this is the local body of the members, if you will. I was going to say believers, but I guess they are believers in their false religion. But this is the kingdom hall. And it's interesting, at all the kingdom halls I've ever seen, their windows are boarded up, whatever the case is. Now I tried looking up their website to find out why is it that windows are boarded up and everything, and one of the reasons they say is because supposedly kingdom halls are built by volunteers and the organization and everything, and it was supposedly cheaper to build it without installing windows or something like that. And it just struck me as odd, but I think there's a little more to it. But basically, this is their local congregation, and they get all their preaching, their material, everything that they teach from the body, from the governing body in Brooklyn. And then they need to go ahead and they could do Q&As, question and answers from the Watchtower literature, training people in public speaking. That way, when they go knock on your door and my door, they've had a little bit of a public speaking classes, if you will, if you remember that from college. So this is where all that happens. Now, I used to live in Alabama, and this was our local Kingdom Hall that was on the way to Prattville Pickers. I put it out there just, in case anybody out there was curious, but that's where it is right there. So the makeup of the organization goes from their local congregation, which is their Kingdom Hall. Then you have these Bethel complexes that you can that they volunteer to go ahead and serve at. I'll just say serve at and leave it there, to go ahead and produce all their literature, which their literature has all the information in it that the Watchtower organization in Brooklyn wants to be distributed. They decide what it is. They decide what teachings are valid, what teachings are scriptural, and then they produce it through the Bethel complex. Just a quick note, in 2001, the Jehovah's Witness organization reported a revenue of over $950 million. $950 million. My link's on the bottom right there from newsday.com. And from my research, this was only selling their literature. Now, their literature is more or less produced free of charge because they have the volunteers there working at the Bethel complexes to produce it all in mass quantities, not to mention their quote-unquote donations to the church. And so they don't push tithing or offerings very strong. They push donations to the church, to the congregation. I keep saying church, but Kingdom Hall. So it's a very financially motivated organization. Currently, as of today, they're working on selling their Brooklyn headquarters, the Watchtower, and they're looking at moving to upstate Warwick. And so basically, if you live in Warwick, New York, I'm sure you've already heard about it. If not, hey, you might be having some neighbors move in, and but they're going to look at selling their building for, supposedly, according to the news, over $1 billion. $1 billion. And so, again, very financially motivated. And then they report that the journal, the Watchtower magazine, has 23 million copies sent out 2 times a month. And so again, those publications are produced more or less on volunteer people at the Bethel complexes, and then they're making a lot of money going through this organization. Just a very quick rundown on the history of Jehovah's Witness organization. The founder of Charles Taze Russell. In the next video, we're going to look at some of his teachings, where the New World Translation comes from, and things like that. So again, this was sort of a dry one, but it's just a basic foundation. You could even look in a lot more in depth as far as the history of this organization, the founding of it. But for now, this will suffice and everything, just to understand where the finances are coming from, how the hierarchy, the makeup is. And so that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. Very quick one, and I'll see you next time. God bless.